Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and to our guests, thank you for being here, and to our constituents and friends out in the audience, thank you for being here as well. Our hearing today will examine U.S. policy options for dealing with ongoing crisis in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. One of the priority countries in the United States is Africa policy as identified by the administration and as confirmed by congressional legislation and oversight over the past several years. This country is two-thirds the size of Western Europe and borders 9 African countries. Its problems extend well beyond our borders. And I should insert, Chairman Smith is unavoidably detained, and he asked me to fill in for him, so this is the chairman's statement that I'm reading. The subcommittee last examined the situation in the DRC in a hearing in March of last year when the storm clouds were gathering in advance of the November elections. The DRC is now struggling with the aftermath of those elections. Opposition political parties and civil society, especially the Catholic Church, appear unwilling to accept the results of the presidential and legislative elections. Opposition leader Etienne Tshisekedi received 32% of the votes, but he believes he was cheated out of the votes that would have made him the winner in the elections. He has staged a presidential swearing-in ceremony and announced that he will form a government. He also has called on supporters to march with him to government headquarters. However, government armed forces have surrounded his home since the presidential results were announced on December 9th, and even his aides have been prevented from meeting with him. Suspicion persists that this election was manipulated in favor of incumbent President Joseph Kabila. The Carter Center, who observed the vote, as well as the United Nations Organization's stabilization mission in the DRC, and most of DRC's civil society, all cast serious doubt on the announced outcome of the election. According to the Carter Center, ballots were missing in some areas, while results for Kabila in other areas were deemed unrealistic. Calls for new elections not only continue but appear to be growing in intensity. Perhaps government intimidation has minimized any uprising by a discontented population, or perhaps the Congolese have accepted that Kabila will do whatever it takes to ensure his victory. It could be the poverty and a lack of information among the population has restrained the widespread resort to protest. Still, there is significant instability throughout the country. This calls into question the long-term stability of a country that is critical to U.S. interest, which includes the continued flow of strategic minerals. Congolese have reason to be skeptical that they will ever have a stable government that functions on their behalf. There has been one crisis after another since independence in 1960, caused by the selfish actions of predatory leadership. An estimated 4 million Congolese lost their lives in 2 wars from which they are still recovering. Most Congolese remain poor, hungry, and in danger of violence. Their government cannot provide the most basic necessities for their families. Public administration is virtually non-existent, with civilian servants demanding payment for the public for even the most routine services. MONUSCO is handling security, and the World Health Organization is dealing with the country's public health issues. The challenge for the international community is to help build the capacity and political will of the Congolese officials to assume the responsibility for caring for the protecting their citizens. Since November, violence attributed to the Congolese military, the Rwanda rebel group, the Democratic Force for the Liberation of Rwanda, and local militia have caused more than 100,000 Congolese to become internally displaced persons or refugees. Local vigilant groups have clashed with the Rwandan rebels in North Kivu province and displaced about 75,000 from 30 villages in North Kivu province. Similar clashes in Ituri and northern Katanga have had a serious impact in those areas as well. This raises serious concerns for a potential humanitarian crisis. Women continue to be targeted for abuse in the DRC. A study that recently appeared in the American Journal of Public Health concluded that an average of 48 women and girls are raped every hour in this country. So before our hearing today is ended, more than 100 females in DRC will have been raped. However, there remains hope for DRC despite the current crisis. Even during the worst stages of the global financial crisis, the World Bank was predicting that DRC's economy would grow by 7% annually over the next several years, making it one of the world's fastest growing economies. At the local level, Congolese reportedly have developed coping methods for an absent government. Women have developed rotating credit systems to compensate for an inaccessible banking system, and farmers have banded together to rent trucks to jointly take their product to market. Since the early days of Congolese independence, the United States has been involved in the DRC and continues to play a significant role there. In fiscal year 2011, economic support funds were targeted to support the government of Congo's stabilization and recovery program through support to community recovery and reconciliation, conflict mitigation and resolution, and the extension of authority. International military education and training funds focus on training Congolese officers on military justice, human rights, and joint operations. The United States also provides significant humanitarian assistance to the DRC. The United States provides bilateral aid to DRC of more than $205 million in fiscal year 2008, $296 million in fiscal year 2009, and $282 million in fiscal year 2010, and $215 million in fiscal year 2011. The Obama administration requests more than $262 million for fiscal year 2012. Our hearing today will allow the administration agencies primarily responsible for the United States relation with the DRE to report on what our government can and will do to help the world's 12th largest country weather this crisis. And before I introduce our witnesses this afternoon, all full statements by members and our panelists, as well as other related statements and materials, will be inserted into the record. I defer now to my colleague, Ranking Member Congressman Payne.
Thank you very much, Chairman Marino, and let me commend you for pinch hitting for Chairman Smith, who was, as you know, a very strong advocate of human rights, and during all of my hearings over the last 20-some years, he's been at just about every hearing. So let me just say that this is a very timely hearing, and we're certainly convening this at the right time. Since the November elections in the Democratic Republic of Congo, bipartisan members of both the House and the Senate have called for increased U.S. involvement to stave off violence, death, and the loss of the democratic gains achieved since 2006, the last election that was held. Some of us have been calling for increased involvement for much longer. As a matter of fact, it was last year on International Women's Day that we began our subcommittee business for the 112th Congress with a hearing on the DRC. Witnesses on the private panel warned that there will be continued crisis and that the election would be a difficult task to cover. The warning was clear and precise. To quote Mr. Affleck, if the situation continues in the same direction as it is now, Congo will have deeply flawed elections in November that will not meet minimum international standards and will be neither free nor fair. Mr. Chairman, in the wake of that hearing, you and I, Mr. Smith, along with Mr. Carnahan, Mr. Thornberry, Mrs. Bass, Mr. Wolf, Mr. McDermott, Mr. Crowley, and Mr. McGovern sent letters to the White House asking that the President appoint a special envoy, to reappoint a special envoy. Last month, the administration announced the appointment of Ambassador Barry Walkley as special advisor to the Great Lakes region and the DRC. While this is a great step in the right direction, the appointment came weeks after the flawed election and in the midst of a political crisis that could have potentially been avoided. As an advisor instead of an envoy, it is not clear that Ambassador Walkley will have the same political support and resources necessary to succeed in this very challenging mission. Only the second election since emerging out of the brutal civil war, and the November elections were supposed to represent a significant milestone along with the DRC's path towards stabilization. Instead, the elections highlight the severe political crisis that is the undercurrent of all other ailments that plague the Congolese people. It is a crisis that did not start last November or even over the last few decades. The crisis in the Congo stems from its colonial history. As we all know, the Congo was the personal province of the King of Belgium, solely his. And he took resources and had a brutal rule where amputations were started, which we saw in the recent wars in the east of Africa. But that started under King Leopold, and we still see remnants of it today. So many of the things that began many years ago have impacts today. And the Congo went through many crises. When it became independent, there was only one college-trained person in the entire country when Belgium just left. So the country started way behind. Then regional conflicts, when Mr. Kabila came after Mobutu's terrible reign. So the country never really has had an opportunity to develop. Then we had the Rwandan and Ugandan help of Kabila to get into office. Then after that, the first African World War, where Angola and Namibia and Zimbabwe fought with the Congo against Uganda and Rwanda. So I think it's amazing that even though things are very bleak, that this country still continues to move forward. And I think that we have to look at the determination of the Congolese people in spite of all of the terrible legacies that have been laid upon them, that they continue to move forward. So now, in the wake of the elections, the Congo is at a critical junction in the history as they move towards peace and stability. The legitimacy of the Kabila regime has been questioned, and the future of democracy hangs in the balance. Joseph Kabila was sworn into office December the 20th. Only one head of state attended, Robert Mugabe of Zimbabwe. Ambassadors from foreign nations, including the United States, were present at the swearing-in. Rejecting the results, opposition leader Tshisekedi held his own swearing-in under virtual house arrest in his garden. In December, Chairman Smith and I called on the administration to work with our partners in the international community and an inclusive group of Congolese stakeholders to conduct an independent review of reported electoral irregularities to help mediate the crisis to avoid further political unrest. With a digital protest plan, we hope that a dialogue is underway. And we must remember that as the political standoff continues to unfold, the people of the Congo continue to suffer. They suffer at the hands of armed groups that rape and pillage to instill fear and to keep resistance away. They suffer from the neglect of a government that lacks the capacity to provide for their basic needs. They suffer from the resource grab that has for hundreds of years, as I mentioned before, left them unconscionably in poverty, while companies and governments, militiamen from their own country, but countries from around the world profit from the misery of the people of the Congo. Today, for the sake of the Congolese people, we are here to examine the lessons learned and figure out a way forward. Lastly, I must add that the American people stand in solidarity with the people of the Congo. One of my constituents, Reverend Phyllis Zoon of Newark, is a mission advocate at the Monmouth Presbytery. Last night she sent me a passionate letter on behalf of herself and her parish and the Presbyterian Church of the USA, asking me to urge the administration to protect the human rights and democracy in the Congo. Ms. Zoom expressed concern for the citizens killed at the hands of the Congolese forces. Her letter just highlighted that she would hope that we would move towards ensuring that the people of the Congo are protected, and I would ask that the letter be submitted to the record.
Without objection, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Chairman Payne. Now I ask that Congressman Turner has a statement to present, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be very brief. I'm here to learn, as Congressman Payne so eloquently pointed out, the sad history of this nation began with the abrupt departure of the Belgians, the most corrupt, brutal, and unenlightened colonialists in all of Africa. The legacy, I think, was compounded with United States policy in an attempt to keep the Congo intact in the early 60s, despite the religious, tribal, geographic, and other elements that may have dictated a different take. And I'm not sure if that's something that this government could look at once again. Is the size and scope of this manageable, and will a representative democracy and the rule of law ever really be possible with all these distractions? But with that said, I yield back.
Thank you, Congressman Turner. I now recognize our colleague, Congressman Carnahan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ranking Member Payne for holding this hearing. The long history, both pre- and post-independence, of violence and exploitation surrounding the DRC's vast natural resources has severely impacted the ability of this country to realize its enormous potential. 8 years following the 2003 peace accords, the DRC remains enmeshed in debilitating challenges, from ethnic conflict to widespread corruption, extreme poverty, and inconceivable human rights abuses. Last year, this committee appropriately held a DRC hearing on International Women's Day. The ongoing presence of armed militias in the eastern Congo, in particular, has continued to perpetuate civil strife and a crisis of sexual and gender-based violence against women and children, with hundreds of thousands of rapes committed. As life becomes increasingly uncertain for the Congolese people, the U.S. and the international community must do more to advance the mediation process, meaningful security sector reforms, and improve governance to elevate civil society and to combat the illicit mineral trade that props up militias, enables cycles of violence, and deprives the Congolese of critical natural resources. In closing, I want to thank the panelists for being here today, sharing their expertise with this committee. I appreciate your time, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Congressman. I want to bring to your attention that Chairman Payne has brought to my attention that he cannot remember the last time that Chairman Smith was not here, and I have been informed that He has a very serious infection in his leg and cannot be with us. And I think I can vouch for all of us saying if he could walk here, crawl here, or be drugged here, he would be here. So we hope that he gets better very soon. I have a little bit of a tradition that since I've been occasionally doing these is I wait to ask my questions last. So I'm going to ask the ranking member and former chairman, Congressman Payne, my colleague, to start off the questioning after we hear your testimony. Thank you. Okay. I'm going to introduce the witnesses first. Ambassador Donald Yamamoto, United States Department of State. Ambassador Yamamoto is no stranger to this subcommittee, having testified before us last March at a hearing about the DRC and on 2 other occasions last year. He has served since 2009 as the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Bureau of African Affairs in the U.S. Department of State. His prior assignments include serving as U.S. Ambassador to Ethiopia from November of 2006 to July of 2009, and as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in the Bureau of African Affairs from 2003 to 2006. Dr. Daniel Baer, United States Department of State. Dr. Baer has served as Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor since November of 2009. He has served in many different offices in the State Department prior to his work in DRL, including the Office of East Asian Pacific Affairs, the Office of African Affairs, the Office of Multilateral and Global Affairs, and the Internet Freedom Office. Prior to working for the State Department, he taught at Georgetown's Business School and had a fellowship at Harvard. Welcome. Dr. Sarah Mendelson, USAID. Dr. Mendelson has served as Deputy Assistant Administrator in USAID's Bureau for Democracy, Conflict of Humanitarian Assistance since May of 2010. She has brought nearly 2 decades of experience working on issues related to human rights and democracy to this position. She was the Director of Human Rights and Security Initiative at the Center for Strategic International Studies and worked as a program officer in Moscow with the National Democratic Institute in 1994 and 1995. She has authored numerous peer-reviewed articles and advised Human Rights Watch and the Council on Foreign Relations. Thank you for being here and welcome. I see that my good friend and colleague, Congresswoman Bass, is with us, and did you care to make a statement? Thank you. Okay. I turn the floor over to Chairman Payne. Excuse me. Okay. We'll start with the Honorable Yamamoto. Please limit your statement to 5 minutes, but your entire written statement will be entered into the record.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And again, it's a great honor to appear before this committee with you, Mr. Chairman Moreno, and of course, Ranking Member Payne and Madam Bass and Turner and Carnahan, who is here. And our prayers are with Congressman Smith.
Thank you.
And I also ask forgiveness that our Assistant Secretary, Johnny Carson, could not be here today. The DRC, with its immense mineral and water wealth and strategic location, is important to the region, to international investors and countries seeking resources. For the United States, the DRC has a special humanitarian commitment for this country and for its people. The DRC's turbulent history, from outside interference to internal development challenges, have never allowed it to really fully live up to its economic promise and the stability that the people of the Congo richly deserve. The Congo lacks a functioning state authority throughout much of the country, lacks capacity to provide basic services such as healthcare, education, infrastructure, and lacks a fully functioning justice system and bureaucracy. The security forces are frequently undisciplined and ill-equipped and poorly trained and irregularly paid. It is in this context that DRC held its second democratic election since the end of the Mobutu era. In the first election, it was wholly organized and directed by the Congolese. This is really the first election directed by the Congolese themselves since the independence. Unlike 2006, the elections were largely managed by the United Nations and other international donors. The USG found the management and technical execution of these elections to be seriously flawed, lacking transparency, and not on par with the positive gains in the democratic process that we have seen in other recent elections in the region and elsewhere. Secretary of State Clinton noted that we were deeply disappointed that the Electoral Commission's provisional results were affirmed without a full investigation of alleged irregularities, despite opportunities to do so. Mr. Tshisekedi and his supporters went so far as to hold their own swearing-in ceremony and to declare themselves the rightful winner of this elections. Mr. Tshisekedi is virtually in a home surrounded by the police. We have called on due process and judicial procedures to be followed in this case. We also deployed many observers from the U.S. mission and from other areas to 10 provinces throughout the Congo. To coordinate our efforts in the DRC, on December 9th, Secretary Clinton announced the appointment of Ambassador Barry Walkley as our new special advisor for the Great Lakes region in the DRC. We are also concerned about the savage reign of terror by the LRA and the illicit trade in the DRC's natural resources, which denies its people access to its own assets. We currently have approximately $11 million in 2010 funds specifically aimed at increasing the transparency and regulations of the trade in key minerals in eastern DRC. We also recently notified Congress of an additional $4.7 million in 2011 for a complex crisis fund resource that we will apply to promoting traceability monitoring in the regional mineral trade. The DRC and the United States have a solid and positive relationship, and our governments continue to engage at the highest level on a range of issues that are aimed towards democracy, peaceful and stable Congo. So, Mr. Chairman and the honored members of this committee, I look forward to answering your questions today. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Baer, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Payne, and the other members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today in light of what Secretary Clinton has described as a seriously flawed presidential and parliamentary elections held on November 28th. I know the committee has demonstrated sustained interest in the DRC, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate also your continued focus on the human rights climate in the DRC. As Ambassador Yamamoto has just outlined, the administration is monitoring events closely and shares Congress's concerns. We are taking action as events unfold. For example, in recent days, the department spokeswoman publicly expressed our concern about reports that Radio France International had been shut down. We urged relevant Congolese authorities to reinstate RFI's frequencies immediately, which they did, and we will continue to advocate to all Congolese political leaders and their supporters the need to act responsibly and renounce violence. I would also like at the outset to reiterate our serious concerns about gender-based violence in the DRC, which I know has also been an interest of this committee. Every hour of the day, dozens of women are raped in the DRC, dozens of women every hour. This is why the United States continues to champion improved protection of civilians, especially an end to the epidemic of rape and gender-based violence. The United States has worked successfully to secure new Security Council sanctions against individuals who lead armed groups operating in the DRC or are linked to crimes involving sexual and gender-based violence and illegal child soldier recruiting. Additionally, the United States led the adoption of a UN Security Council resolution that supported for the first time due diligence guidelines for individuals and companies operating in the mineral trade in eastern Congo. In general, and in part as a result of the training provided by the United States to the Congolese National Police, the police in the DRC have exercised restraint when dealing with demonstrators and protesters. However, in some notable instances during the run-up to the elections and in their immediate aftermath, the government of the Democratic Republic of the Congo resorted to excessive force to break up protests. Citizens were shot and beaten, detained without charge, sometimes in the middle of the night, and sometimes disappeared. The government has also placed restrictions on the freedoms of speech, press, and assembly in breach of democratic norms. We expect the DRC government will be tempted to resort to such behavior in the future. For this reason, the USG has repeatedly and will continue to forcefully make clear that such violations of civil and human rights are unacceptable and must cease immediately, and that the perpetrators of human rights violations must be brought to justice. Now, the court system in the DRC is dysfunctional at best, and in many parts of the country, non-functional. The electoral law, for example, calls for the establishment of a constitutional court, among whose functions would be the review of electoral challenges. But to date, the new court has not been established. The existing court system will be severely challenged to judge impartially and credibly the thousands of challenges expected to be filed by disappointed parliamentary candidates. When provincial elections take place later this year, there will be more challenges. This surely will exacerbate the already troubling situation. Moreover, the Congolese Supreme Court is widely considered to be biased toward President Kabila, and its decision validating his electoral victory was extensively criticized as premature, unfair, and poorly executed. The U.S. and international community, foreign governments, international organizations, and NGOs have contributed billions of dollars and sent thousands of advisors into the DRC over the years. To date, unfortunately, the government of the Democratic Republic of the Congo has not shown the same commitment to reform, and we need to be clear. Without a strong and sustained commitment by the government to democracy and human rights, little can be done that will be sustainable. We all know that the DRC is one of the least developed countries in the world. Even were the government completely committed to improving democracy and human rights, its abilities are limited. And developing the capacity of the Congolese government, enacting laws and transferring tools and know-how is but a small part of the solution. Helping them foster and inculcate a respect for human rights and the rule of law and embed it into institutions as a way of doing things is the central task and the larger part of a sustainable solution. I've already addressed the issues surrounding the courts. In addition, a robust and free media sector must be established and allowed to function. A vibrant civil society must be supported and recognized as a vital partner in building a stronger DRC. Corruption must be tackled so that entrepreneurship and economic growth can win the day. Children must be educated, and all people need to know their rights and be given a chance to understand through experience how those rights undergird democratic societies. All of these things are hard, long-term tasks. They all require leadership and commitment from the top of the government, and none can be accomplished until the government is able to provide for the physical security of its people. Democracy and human rights are both contributors to and dependent on peace and security. In conclusion, I want to assure the subcommittee that the administration is unwavering in its commitment to move Congo to internationally accepted human rights standards and norms. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I welcome your questions.
Dr. Mendelson.
Good afternoon, Chairman Marino, Chairman Payne, members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to speak with you today about the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to discuss the work of USAID with you, such great supporters of Africa, and with my colleagues from the State Department with whom we work so closely. For me personally, it's a great pleasure to be back testifying before you, and I'm very sorry Chairman Smith is ill, and our best wishes are with him. How each country reconciles or not with violent episodes from its past is an important driver of political development. In the DRC, democratic institutions and processes play a vital role through which the country can overcome political divisions reinforced by years of conflict. During the past several years, some real progress has been made towards strengthening democratic institutions and processes in the DRC, including adoption of a revised constitution and successful elections in 2006. Through our assistance programs, the United States government has sought to help support a stable and democratic state, one that is at peace with its neighbors and provides for its citizens. We pursue our programs with a particular focus on the costs of conflict borne by women and youth. As you know, presidential and legislative elections held in the DRC on November 28th were widely anticipated as an opportunity for the DRC to move beyond its past and advance towards democracy and stability. The Independent National Election Commission, the CENI, took primary responsibility for managing the elections with some international support. Established just 8 months before Election Day, the CENI was able to register 32 million voters. Millions of Congolese citizens went to the polls. The CENI's accomplishments should not be underappreciated. However, the CENI's management of the electoral process was generally inadequate. Even allowing for the significant logistical challenges inherent to the DRC, nearly every step of the electoral process was delayed. International and domestic observers, as well as Secretary Clinton, have noted considerable flaws throughout the process, in the pre-election period, on Election Day, in the tabulation of votes, and in the process for electoral dispute resolution. In my written testimony, I discussed these issues more fully and described steps that could be taken to improve the proficiency, transparency, and credibility of future elections in the DRC. USAID supported the 2011 election process through direct funding for the International Foundation for Electoral Systems and the Carter Center to support civic and voter education, as well as international election observation and capacity building of human rights organizations to observe the elections. The IFAS Civic Education Program reached over 19 million people, providing citizens an accurate information on elections and enabling them to effectively participate. The Carter Center deployed 10 two-person teams of international long-term election observers to all provinces in the months preceding the elections, and on Election Day, working closely with domestic observers from the Catholic Church, among others. These efforts were instrumental in identifying key election-related irregularities. Moving forward, USAID has a range of ongoing programs that support citizen involvement in democratic processes and facilitate political reforms, including strengthening the rule of law institutions, including the Constitutional Court once it is established, civic education activities through robust partnerships with a range of civil society organizations across the DRC, good governance activities that seek to engage productive civic participation in democratic processes, including community-based organizations and civil society groups, election monitoring and human rights work implemented by the Carter Center, which will be essential for assessing any human rights violations or conflict during upcoming elections. And of course, media sector development through Internews Network that builds the capacity of Congolese media institutions, particularly community radio stations. At the same time, USAID has been providing assistance to the DRC to support the electoral process. We've also undertaken a number of activities and actions to mitigate the potential for violence, such as establishing early warning mechanisms, monitoring incidents of violence, and supporting conflict and atrocity prevention activities. Our reconciliation work provides opportunities for conflict-affected groups to interact in safe spaces, to address issues of mutual concern, reconcile differences, and promote understanding and trust, and work on common goals. USAID is also addressing the causes and consequences of human rights abuses that are being fueled by conflict in the DRC, including sexual and gender-based violence and trafficking in persons. And attention to these issues is essential before the DRC can enter on a path to long-term sustainable development. The United States and our partners in the international community remain dedicated to supporting efforts for stability and prosperity in the DRC, although ultimately, of course, advancing democracy, human rights, and good governance there requires the engagement of the Congolese people and political commitment by the government of the DRC. We are hopeful such a path will be taken. The written testimony I submitted to the subcommittee expands on the themes I've presented, and I welcome any questions you have.
Thank you, Dr. Mendelson. And now I think the timing is right for me to ask my colleague and ranking member Payne to lead off the questioning. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. We should have an interlude with the instrument. I finally get a chance to ask the questions. Well, let me thank all of the witnesses for your testimony. Let me ask a question perhaps to all panelists. And you may want to answer it or not, but and I'll probably do that with most of the questions unless it gets to specific USAID questions, and I'll certainly relate it to you. In March of last year, our subcommittee heard testimony from witnesses who warned of the current electoral crisis. As noted in today's testimony, these elections were marred by violence, reports of fraud, and logistical gaps. Yet, even if the electoral irregularities and other flaws had not emerged, administrating elections of this scale in this country with little infrastructure was going to be challenging without these other problems. As it's been mentioned, more than 31 million registered voters, estimated 19,000 candidates for 500 parliamentary seats, 11 candidates for presidency, country about 1/4 the size of the United States. To what extent, if at all, do these elections represent a setback for democracy and moving forward in the DRC? And do you believe that the problems would the outcome be the same if these election fraud were not committed? In other words, was it enough, in your opinions, to change the outcome of the election? We do know, and it's clear, that there were many problems. The question basically is, do you believe that the outcome would have been different without these problems? Ambassador?
Thank you, Congressman Payne. From the 2006 elections, where some of us were there as election observers and looked at the process, it was almost entirely managed and paid for by the international community. And the feeling was that for the ownership and for the people of the Congo, that they want to take ownership of this process. And so the next election, this second election, had a much more integrated dynamics that the Congolese would be the authority on this electoral process. And so is it a setback? It's one step in the process of the democratic process in the Congo. It's an issue that the people of the Congo wanted, and it's something that we would support, that we had supported. We started the process of supporting this election earlier, back in 2008 and 2009, with the IFES and later on with the Carter Center. But was that enough sufficient funds? And of course the answer is there's not always sufficient funding to do that. But this was a step that we took. The other issue too is that if you look at the elections, this election compared to the 2006 elections, you didn't have the violence that was marred after those elections with the problems of militias by Bemba, Kabila, and other groups. Here the death toll was unacceptable, but not to the level that we saw in 2006. As far as the results of the election, we were very clear from the outset, I think all of us were, in the international community, that these elections were not transparent, they lacked transparency, and did not measure up to the democratic gains that made in other African elections. However, whether these irregularities would have been sufficient enough to have changed the outcome of those elections still is unclear. But the issue is that the process has begun, and that through our commitment after the election by Secretary Clinton and the State Department, we are committed to ensuring that the electoral process will continue to progress and address the needs and build the trust and confidence of the people of the Congo.
Okay. The electoral body does not, committee does not have the National Congo Independent National Election Commission, does not have any civil society, I believe, on that commission. And I wonder if you believe that for civil society to be a part of that CENI would improve, or CEMCO would improve, well, it is CENI, would improve the confidence that the people of the Congo would have in that body.
I'll defer to my colleagues, but overall the CENI reflects the process established, and of course how the CENI is established, etc., will be for the Congolese to determine, but I defer to you.
Obviously, the CENI is established under a statutory authority, and so the way it's established is part of the law. But I think in general our approach has been, not only in the Congo but elsewhere around the world, to encourage the participation of civil society and to encourage governments to make civil society partners, particularly in electoral processes where the credibility of processes can be enhanced to the extent that civil society is participating. I think that what your question speaks to a more general challenge that lies ahead in the Congo, and building off your last question in terms of whether this was a setback. Certainly it wasn't a step forward, and in order to move forward there is not only the challenge of improving the execution of elections, but also mitigating the political tensions that have arisen. And one of the ways that the political problems can be solved is by making a more inclusive process across the board. So engaging with civil society on the part of the Senate would be one example of how that might be executed.
Dr. Mendelson, as you know, a team of international election experts from the International Foundation for Electoral Systems, IFES, as we all know, the National Democratic Institute, the NDI, was in the DRC from January the 5th to the 13th, assessing the feasibility of conducting a review of the results of the November 28th legislative elections. Please describe in detail the results of IFES and NDI assessment and how feasible are the proposed recommendations that they made.
So in Secretary Clinton's statement on December 20th, she said, "We believe a review of the electoral process by the Congolese authorities and outside experts may shed additional light on the causes of the irregularities, identify ways to provide more credible results, and offer guidance for the ongoing election results and for future elections." So we funded a small team from IFES and NDI for a scoping mission to ascertain if a more comprehensive assessment was feasible. We were very clear that we would not play any role in validating or certifying electoral results or processes. The government of the Democratic Republic of the Congo allowed the team to meet with a range of stakeholders, and the Senate, in particular, allotted significant time to spend with this team. But unfortunately, the types of activities that the GDRC was hoping that the team would undertake were not in line with the team's priorities. So by the end of the time in the DRC, it was clear that a more comprehensive assessment would not be feasible. To your specific question, there has not been a detailed assessment done, and they have not published specific recommendations.
Let me ask this to Assistant Secretary Yamamoto. According to the official results, as we know, upheld by the Supreme Court on December 16th, Kabila have gotten 49% of the vote, while Tshisekedi received 32%. Tshisekedi has refused to accept these results and has inaugurated himself as president. Tshisekedi has also called for the cancellation of all legislative results, and the opposition is reportedly organizing mass protests for February the 16th. In your opinion, what can we do to assess that Congo does not descend into further conflict and instability as a result of the flawed elections? How likely is it that a standoff between President Kabila and opposition leader Tshisekedi will escalate into mass violence in the coming weeks or months? What is the current status of the mediation efforts between the government and opposition, and what impact, if any, has this electoral dispute had on regional stability? As we know, the Great Lakes region is very fragile.
And thank you, Congressman. And the issue for us is that we have been in close discussions, private discussions, with Assistant Secretary Johnny Carson, our Ambassador Jim Entwistle, and his deputy Sam Lakely out in Kinshasa, with every part of the opposition, particularly Tshisekedi, Mr. Tshisekedi, as well as President Kabila, Malunda from the Senate, and all aspects. In respect to your question, the issue is that on the short term, to avoid problems from escalating beyond where they are now, is that there has to be open political dialogue first, and also communications to ensure that there is transparency not only in the process but also in the discussions. We also have called and moved forward in discussions privately on opening more political space, ensuring that the opposition and all people have the right to express their wills, but also responsibly express those wills without violence, and also to have a commitment from all parties that they will not commit themselves, or that they would avoid violence, etc. And so on the short term is dialogue, communications, open political space, and over the long term is much more technical assistance, and commitment to capacity building. What does this pertain for the regional stability in the area? And to your last question, is that all of the countries are clearly focused on what happens in the Congo, but also what's happening in neighboring countries, from Burundi to Congo, Brazzaville, etc. Our special advisor, Barry Walkley, is currently in discussions with the regional leaders, and that's important to work with our ambassadors to get their views, and also to bring better communications and dialogue so that it doesn't spiral out and that there is a confidence building among the participants in this region. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Payne. My good friend and colleague and neighbor, Representative Karen Bass.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and also thanks to the ranking member. But I appreciate the chair for moving forward and holding this hearing, and I definitely want to express my best wishes for Chairman Smith, that he get better. I wanted to ask a few questions, kind of following up on what you were saying, Mr. Yamamoto. You described what is needed, in the future: dialogue, communication, political space, technical assistance, and capacity building. And I've not had the opportunity to travel to the DRC, but everything that, I've read and in the hearings, it sounds as though a situation of chaos is there. So how do you have dialogue, communication, political space, TA, and capacity building in the midst of chaos? Is one question. And then I want to switch reels in a minute and talk about the minerals, but I just want to understand what is the impact, or what has been the impact, of our statements as the United States regarding the elections and the situation in the DRC.
Well, let's go to the last part first. I think the statements have been very important because, A, it underscores I think our position and also credibility of what we have observed in the electoral process. It also calls to all the parties, not only the government but also the opposition, that this is what we've seen, this is the problems, these are the issues that we need to resolve, and this is the way forward. The other issue, too, is to work with the neighboring states on what is happening in the Congo precisely, so that no one misinterprets or misunderstands what's happening, or that the commitment from the international community in the United States still remains very important to that region and also to the neighboring states. But more important is the private dialogues that we have made with Mr. Tshisekedi and Mr. Malunda, and of course the President himself, on where we see and what we can do together to ensure that this does not spiral out of control, and what steps are necessary to restore confidence and trust in the people of the Congo in the electoral process. And it's going to take time. As to your first question, how do you bring chaos, or how do you bring order to what seemingly looks like chaos? It's going to take time. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be challenging. But I think the areas that we're focusing on are the right areas that we need to focus on. It's going to be, on the short term, is to build that confidence, to build the communications, to build transparency, and over the long term, to dedicate and commit towards capacity building, judicial reforms, political reforms. And I'd like to defer also to my colleagues who are really at the forefront of on some of these programs.
But I mean, we started off this hearing talking about, in the hour that we have this hearing, how many women are going to be raped.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
I'm having difficulty understanding the difference that we make. Do we consider the Kabila government, do we consider it legitimate? I mean, what leverage do we have?
The leverage is not just with the President, with President Kabila and his government. The leverage is with all the parties together. Let me just give you an example. Between 2003 and 2006, with our tripartite group, we made about 26 visits to the region to understand better what we need to do, what the problems were. But more important is, by our mere presence in these remote areas, is to underscore that we're committed to finding a solution. I think the groups that we deployed, not only from the embassy but also from the Department of State, also the support for the other organizations, underscores that we remain committed towards finding solutions and towards working with the people of the Congo. Yes, it's going to be hard, as you say. The problems are enormous, but we need to tackle them one step at a time, issue by issue. And I think over the long term, there will be a tremendous amount of progress.
Secretary Baer, Mendelson.
Thank you. I agree with Ambassador Yamamoto. I would just say that, when we look back 10 years ago, there were thousands of people dying every day. And one of the things, unfortunately, that we've been working on is preserving enough stability to make the incremental progress that he described. And unfortunately, when you have a territory as large as the Congo is, with as little development as the Congo has, as poor of a justice sector, and as poorly controlled of a military, the challenges can seem insurmountable. I think that Secretary Clinton's visit to Goma 2 years ago underscored her personal commitment, particularly on the fight against sexual and gender-based violence. Undersecretary Otero went to the Eastern Congo last October. Assistant Secretary Carson has on numerous times engaged with the government on this. So I think our engagement is important. I think one of the things that our
Is the communication such that, like, the majority, well, I don't want to say the majority, but who knows that we go?
People. I was going to say. I think one of the most important effects of our engagement is that it gives credibility to the people on the ground who are engaging. If you look at the election context, one of the most loud voices in the domestic context has been the Catholic Church, and to the extent that the international community is calling out concerns and flaws, it gives credibility to those domestic voices who are also calling out their concerns. And we all recognize that in order to solve the governance challenges from which the violence flows, that there is going to have to be a political solution at the domestic level. It's not going to be, in the end, it will be with our support, but it is not going to be of our doing. And it is going to be of the doing of the Congolese people. And to the extent that we can give credibility to those voices that will be part of that political solution, our voices add value to theirs.
I've been working on, as this biography suggested, political transition for over 20 years, and it's a nonlinear path. And I think that, again, when you look at this election versus 2006, what's really striking about it is that the international community did not shepherd it. It was the Congolese, and there are going to be setbacks and certain parts that did go well. Election day itself, which was much more peaceful, very large turnout. I think it's the idea that there's tremendous chaos and that we can't do any kind of assistance in that or development work in that environment isn't borne out by the actual impact that some of our investments have. I share your concern both in terms of the gender-based violence and the human trafficking costs. I think that the administration is very devoted both to the National Action Plan. We're really focused in on post-conflict and conflict regions and trying to come up with measurable interventions that we can be held accountable for. Mm-hmm. We're about to launch a new counter-trafficking policy at USAID in the next couple of weeks. We're going to increase modestly our investments in combating trafficking in the DRC. So we understand this is a larger piece than we alone can do, but we are very focused on trying to find evidence-based programming interventions that we know are going to work.
If you don't mind, Mr. Chair, could I just ask a couple more questions?
Congresswoman, you can have all the time that you need.
Thank you. I wanted to switch reels for a minute, and I believe that Dr. Baer had mentioned earlier about U.S.-issued guidelines regarding the mineral trade, and I wanted to know if you could talk a little bit about that. I'm specifically interested in who's involved in the mineral trade. Are there a lot of U.S. companies involved? Are there European companies? Who's engaging in the mineral trade?
Historically, the mineral trade has included every range of actors that you described, from the small shop or the one-person show that sells to a middleman that sells to a middleman that sells to a middleman, to large multinationals. I don't know which U.S. firms are operating there now, if any. I know that many firms have, because of the violence, either made initial planning missions but have not chosen to develop mining operations, et cetera, or have paused or withdrawn. I believe Rio Tinto is still operating, but I think Freeport McMoran has ceased recently. I may be getting them inverted, but so there are a range of firms operating. I think
are those firms here? I'm not familiar with those names.
Freeport McMoran is Rio Tinto is Australian. Freeport McMoran is it may be a U.S. firm. I'm not sure. In any case, they operate with Congolese partners in most cases as a joint venture. The challenge, though, for whoever the operator is, whether it's a domestic Congolese operator or an international firm, the challenge is making sure that the supply chains are secure, being able to know the provenance of the minerals, because what happens is the revenues get siphoned off at various side points or get smuggled in.
Corruption.
Through the minerals get smuggled into a clean supply chain, allowing rebel groups to fund their activities. And so the reason why the international community is focused on that is to try to starve the rebel groups of this source of funding. And of course, the rebel groups have been primary perpetrators of the sexual and gender-based violence. I think it's a good thing that the OECD has developed guidelines on due diligence for supply chains, and we expect that as companies learn how to better implement those guidelines, that will help solve parts of the problem. But to be completely straight with you, it's a monumental practical challenge given all of the challenges that we've already described, the vast distance, the lack of police, et cetera. It is a huge challenge, and it'll be one going forward, but it's one that responsible companies are going to figure out a way to solve. They figure out a way to solve problems with supply chains of all sorts all over the world, and they will figure out how to solve it, and we continue to look to them to make progress on that.
And just to add to Dan's comments is, we still await the Security and Exchange Commission issuance of the new regulations under Section 1502, because this will increase the confidence of U.S. firms of what the regulations and the guidelines are in operating in the Congo, so that they can make the adjustments. Right now, not knowing what the regulations are, it creates a lot of insecurity and questions about how they can manage the conflict minerals. And also it has repercussions on the people of the Congo in that area as far as unemployment and other issues. But I think after the regulations are issued, that will help. In the meantime, the ICGLR, which is the regional groups, are making plans, are moving forward. We continue to talk to the American businesses about the trade in the Congo, because we need to be there.
And can I get that information somewhere, like who is involved? Because I'm just wondering when we're talking about civil society and all that, I'm just wondering if there is a way that they can be engaged, some of the major, companies, whether they're U.S. or otherwise.
Sure, we can provide you that information, and we'll come and brief you privately.
Oh, I would appreciate that.
Thank you.
One of the initiatives that we have engaged with U.S. firms on, as well as other multinational firms, is called the Voluntary Principles on Security and Human Rights, which has to do specifically with the private security contractors and public security forces that multinational firms use to protect their assets, and making sure that they are trained and ensuring their respect for human rights. And so that's something that we've discussed both with the Congolese government and with multinational firms. When I was in Kinshasa last June, I had a small meeting with a number of firms that are represented there. So we are working with firms on that. And to your question about civil society, there is a very, against all odds, an extremely vibrant civil society in Eastern Congo that works on issues like this every day. And many of the firms that are operating there are in contact with them, and that partnership is certainly going to be part of the long-term solution.
Okay, great. I love those firms too, these security firms.
May I add that USAID has a very interesting responsible minerals trade program that began in FY10, and it's got three basic components. It's about infrastructure and regulatory reform, the protection of communities and child-free certification, and technical assistance to develop a pilot program for this conflict-free minerals supply chain to get sector users involved. And we have an extractive industries advisor currently out in the East with a group of users to explore how to work together. We can get you additional details if you want.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Congresswoman Bass. I now turn to my colleague, Congressman Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A question for you, Mr. Ambassador. We've recently deployed about 100 military advisors that could cross between Uganda, Rwanda, and the Congo to advise. Maybe they can get involved in other things as well, but can you tell us about the progress, how we'd measure the progress? Is there a timetable on this? Will it expand?
Thank you very much, Congressman, for your question. In our last testimony, of course, we had with Assistant Secretary Vershbow of Department of Defense, we explained the process of assigning up to 100 Special Forces members in the role of training, not so much in combat role, but in training and support for the troops of the CAR and Uganda and Congo in order to help them have the capacity and capability to go after Joseph Kony, Odhiambo, and the others in the LRA process. We're approaching, as you know, the 150-day mark for a review of the process, and at that time I think we'll have more information for you. As far as training, I think the training process is going through extremely well. But the question comes in is, well, when are they going to get Kony? When is this going to come to an end? And I think we have to look at it as a very long-term process. But that our role in this is really a very small part in the sense that it's training, because ultimately it's going to be the Congolese, Ugandans, and the CAR themselves who are going to bring this to a conclusion. Our role is to support. We did file a War Powers Act request, and we thank you very much for your support and on this process.
The mission is defined more than simply taking out Mr. Kony. Is that true?
That's correct. The main function is to build the capacity, the training, and the support to give them the capabilities, and it has capabilities to carry this out. But again, it's a comprehensive approach. Not only is it militarily, but also it's to bring in other programs, such as AID has a cell phone program which provides cell phones and communications to local communities, which through the cell towers constructed by USAID, communities can communicate with each other to say where maybe potential attacks are taking place by the LRA. As you know, it's very, very difficult to go after the LRA. You're talking 150 to 200 troops operating in a size less than the size of Colorado. It's a very huge, immense area.
I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Turner. I believe that the Ranking Member Payne has some follow-up questions.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I was in Eastern Congo this past summer of 11, and we visited a IDP camp in Goma where the IDPs were from villages that were attacked by Joseph Kony. And at the present time, is there any, and let me just make it very clear that I support the U.S. effort of sending U.S. troops to train the Ugandans and the Congolese. I think Kony's been around for 20 years. It's a disgrace on the terror that he has inflicted on people. He should have been taken out 20 years ago. It's 20 years too late. But I hope that we will be able to train the troops so that we can finally eliminate this scourge that has been around. Do we have any assessment of where he is now? He was in the Congo at that time. Maybe Ambassador, do you know if he's in the CAR or he's out of Uganda? Right.
I think, Congressman, there are obviously information, et cetera, that we work with. I think we probably should give you a separate briefing on some of the details. But suffice it to say that the commitment and the enhancement that our troops are able to bring to bear in this endeavor has been extremely positive. But also it has to be in the context of a very comprehensive approach. And one of the positive results we're seeing is the number of people who are leaving the LRA. You're talking core fighters along with some of the 800 or so people who are accompanying the LRA groups. So that's a very positive sign. And then the continuation of reconciliation and reintegration, not only in the Uganda of the Acholi community, but also in other areas, has been very positive and is helping to bring these people out.
Let me ask you, how are the current relations between DRC and Rwanda, and are they still having joint exercises together on the eastern border?
They did have a joint operation. Right now, we continue to promote open dialogue between the two governments, and that's one of the main roles that Ambassador Barry Walkley is going to do in his discussions. As you know, he went to the ICGLR meeting in Uganda in December. We'll continue that process and to bring really all the parties together in an open dialogue. And so it does continue, it's positive, and it continues to progress.
In regards to MONUSCO, they have a different mandate now. It's supposed to be more robust. And secondly, I understand that there is a need in their operation for attack helicopters. And do you know where that stands and whether that can be provided to the UN?
I know for the United Nations, the biggest, and we're talking about MONUSCO now.
Right.
And the core mandate for MONUSCO, of course, is stabilization, which is opposite from MONUC, which is much more peacekeeping. But for MONUSCO, one of the main challenges has been air assets. And we've spoken of this in great detail with the head of MONUSCO, Roger Meese, and that is, you're absolutely correct. This is an issue we continue to grapple with. We have gone to other countries to help support, and this continues to be a challenge.
I know in the previous election, the 06 elections, the South African armed forces assisted in the delivery of ballots and so forth. Were they involved in this election also?
Yes, and also the Angolans as well.
Okay, very good. Just the final question. Could you tell me, in your opinion, the difference between a special advisor that's been appointed by the president rather than the special envoy that have served previously and that we asked to be reappointed?
I think there's a lot of the differences and probably more in nuance. But as far as the special advisor is concerned, Ambassador Barry Walkley was, as any envoy or advisor, was selected among a group of candidates, and he proved to be the best given his linguistic abilities, also his ties to the region, not only in the DRC but in other areas. And more important is because he has the trust and the confidence not only of the Secretary of State, Secretary Clinton, but also of the Assistant Secretary, Johnny Carson, and also of the ambassadors in the region who Ambassador Barry Walkley knows personally and have worked together with, as well as with Roger Meese, the head of MONUSCO. So it's been a very productive and cooperative relationship.
Mm-hmm. So there's no difference in the titles?
But there are nuances.
Beg your pardon?
There are nuances, sir.
Seems like that's a sensitive question around the Department of State. No one wants to speak out on it, huh? Well, all right, well.
But I don't think you'll see any less commitment or any less dedication to this endeavor.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Congressman Payne. I have a couple of questions based on my colleagues' questions, and I'm just going to get right to the point here. I was a prosecutor for 18 years, so that's how I get right to the point. First of all, I just was in Africa 2 weeks ago. on the continent. I was in Ghana and Liberia. It was an extraordinary, eye-opening, heart-wrenching experience, particularly in Liberia. After 13 years or 14 years of war, civil war albeit, the first female president, Ellen Sirleaf, has taken control of the situation and seems to be doing an excellent job, but she has her work cut out for her, particularly the abuse of women and children. And this seems to be a thread running through the entire, at least from my experience, southern part of the continent of Africa. But be that as it may, I get the impression that the administration is accepting the status quo, almost a hands-off approach. And please correct me if I am wrong, but if I am wrong, please give me, Ambassador Yamamoto and anyone else who wants to chime in on this, please give me specific examples of this not happening.
Congressman Moreno, you raise a very fundamental issue in the role of development, and I defer to Sarah as well. But, you know, as ambassador in both in Ethiopia and Djibouti, and of course I served as Sharjah and Guinea-Conakry, one of the issues that we were committed to, and Secretary Clinton really raised this during her trips to Africa, is the status of women. By raising the status of women and fighting the issues of sexually based violence, we can not only enhance the integrity, the honor, and the status of women, but also development, and also create stability in those communities. And that's something fundamental right now that's really changed dramatically, certainly in this administration. It's come out very, very prominently in all the programs that we're doing throughout the continent. And I think the Secretary Clinton received a call from Johnson Sirleaf, and I think immediately she went off for the inauguration to lend support to the efforts and the issues that she takes very personal and she supports very strongly. And that's something that our secretary has done as well throughout her trips, and she'll be making another trip to Africa. But the programs, I'll give you one example. What we did in East Africa right now through USAID and the programs is we have these community-based development projects where we do community schools, and for the moms we do micro-enterprise loans. For the dads, we're doing agricultural progress because 80% are agricultural based. We're doing land certification programs and other issues. But what we're finding out is that for daughters, their moms are their heroes. This is an issue that we're expanding, and this is a project and program that AID and the State Department and our embassies are really taking a hands-on and supporting. And as we talk to our ambassadors, this is one of the things that we're looking at and hearing stories throughout the continent. But, you know, Sarah, you want to?
And just, I'll get back to you in one moment, but please, Dr. Mendelson.
I've had the pleasure of, over the last several months, working very closely on the National Action Plan with my colleagues from USAID and State and the White House. And really under the leadership at USAID of Administrator Shaw and Deputy Administrator Steinberg, who has decades of commitment to the issue of women, war, and peace, we are really trying to advance a paradigm shift where issues of the safety and security of women and children are woven through our entire understanding of what stability and development is. If the National Action Plan is actually fully implemented, we would have, through the Department of Defense, Department of State, USAID, a very different conception of how we engage in stability. It would be both standalone programs, but really fully woven through every health, education, fully integrated. And I think it is, as somebody who is a private citizen, worked on this for a long time, it is potentially extremely exciting. And of course, the President of Liberia herself was one of the authors of UN Resolution 1325, very involved in the whole concept of women, war, and peace. So, you know, it's taken 10 years. We've come late to the game in many ways, but we are fully committed to implementing this over the next many months.
Dr. Baer, care to comment?
Sure. First of all, thank you for the question. you're doing a good job of channeling the chairman, because it was the kind of question that I've grown used to getting from him. So, and of course, I share others.
There will be more following.
Good wishes for him. I mean, no person of good conscience could possibly look at the continent of Africa and accept the status quo. And nobody that I work with in the administration does. And so, first of all, let me say that. I think there are a range of ways that we're engaging, and oftentimes the most important ones are in small ways. One of the things, for example, that we're doing is working on helping train women journalists, because one of the things we've found is in order to get the problems of women and children solved, you have to get the stories of women and children out. And so training women journalists across Africa is one of the things we're focusing on. More specifically, we've taken concrete action in the multilateral sphere to focus attention on crises in Africa that have particular impact on women and children, like the conflict in Cote d'Ivoire last year, which we raised at the Human Rights Council and have supported follow-up action since. I was out in Western Cote d'Ivoire in October. That continues to be an issue of concern. There are ways that we, our ambassadors across the continent, at Secretary Clinton's direction and under the support of Ambassador Verveer, are focusing their attention on women community leaders, particularly because, as Sarah says, we've learned the lesson over the last 20 years that peace and security arrangements that don't include women and women's views do not work. And so it is absolutely the case that this administration is focused on improving not only the condition of women, but also their participation in solving the problems that face the continent.
Okay. And I completely understand your compassionate positions in this. Believe me, I do. And Ambassador Yamamoto, I equate it to you're walking, as you come in here, you're walking on a tightrope with one end in our hand, and we're not quite sure where the other end's connected. So you have a fine line to walk. But let me pose this scenario, and I credit Secretary Clinton for being there for the inauguration of the president. I missed it by a couple of days. I wish we could have been there, but we weren't able to. But we did meet with her and have a lengthy conversation. But all the programs that you have implemented and you hope to implement concerning raising the level of the female, the women's proper role, I mean, let's face it, it always seems, no matter where we're at in the world, that the wives, the mothers, the grandmothers are keeping the rest of us focused and narrow. I know that's the way in my home. That's just the way it is. It was when I was raised, my grandmother and my mother, and now my wife just took over, and instead of having 2 kids, she calls me the 3rd kid. But be that as it may, as devoted as our intentions are, what do we do with Tshisekedi, who just says, I'm not going to cooperate, and still has the control that he exercises? What do we do about an individual like that, regardless of the programs that are implemented? And Ambassador, please, would you please start off?
As you know, we provided what is about $7 billion in assistance programs. Most of it's earmarked, but the issue is that we distribute and implement most of our program, over 80%, through NGO groups with the social, civil societies and communities in the communities locally, not through the governments. And that's how we get through and around leaders or people who are opposed to it.
How do you get Tshisekedi's attention? Seriously get the attention?
That's it's difficult. We have, speaking with him, he has a very strong-minded mind, but the question comes in is talking to not only him, but also to his people. And that goes back to, I think, back to the DRC on a type of government that is going to be formed after this election. And we've called for inclusive government. So that means inclusion of all parties and all groups, including Tshisekedi's people, not himself, but so that helps to influence that wing of the opposition party.
I understand your diplomatic responsibility and approach, believe me, and I would not trade positions with you for all the money in the world. But I seem to, it's just not connecting.
Let me. one thing is that I'm getting more notes here.
That's all right, please. Take your time, and I understand.
I think it's very telling that, Mr. Shisekedi called for a general strike, and very few people came to the party to participate, which I think is telling. But more important is going back to your heart of your question is, how do we really bring a societal change? How do we bring fundamental changes? And at every level, we have thought with AID, with our colleagues, and I'll give you some examples. Some things that we have done over the last decade. We have trained 140,000 peacekeeping troops throughout Africa. AFRICOM has helped in training. The 391 Battalion in the DRC is part of that process, not only for peacekeeping, but also civilian control. The other issue is security sector reform, which is fundamental, basic through all the countries and all the development, because SSR is really critical if you want to see rapid development. The other issue, too, is, I'll give you an example, is the formation of the Africans themselves, of forming groups and like Amazon in Somalia. They're doing it themselves because that's an integral threat to them. And so our job is to help support those efforts. And I think by giving the societal changes and dramatic changes at the basic level, I think that's going to speak volumes and help over the long term.
I think we need to bring more attention on an international basis, a significant attention, and expose what is taking place there for what it's worth or not worth. Let me pose this, if you don't mind. I've seen the women in Liberia and certainly in Ghana taking a very aggressive and important role, but are we setting up perhaps an environment for the equation of an Arab Spring?
In Liberia and Ghana?
Yes. Well, no, excuse me, no. In what we're talking about right here in the DRC, when you see you're implementing these programs, I'm sorry for not being clear on that.
Okay. Obviously, Ghana remains kind of a bright spot of
sure does.
gains in the continent. And actually,
yes.
Speaking to your comments earlier, I lived in Ghana for a time, and one of my favorite sayings there was, "When an old woman dies, it's like a library has burned." Mm-hmm. And certainly the appreciation of women's leadership is something that we hope to see elsewhere. I don't think we predict. Obviously, there are conditions unique to every context, including in the Middle East, where we've seen political transitions this year. And while there is some similarity, there have been different causes and events that have led to them. I don't think we predict any that type of political transition in the near term in the DRC. I think what we do predict is that the tensions that are there now, the political tensions between Kabila and the opposition, are tensions that need to be dealt with, and they need to be dealt with in a meaningful way in order for people to be satisfied. And the good news is there are a range of things that the president can do and that others in the government can do to bring civil society and to bring the opposition into conversation and dialogue and to move the country forward. And one of the things that they can do is commit to better election processes going forward, and that is something that they will have the support of the international community to do.
Okay. Dr. Mendelson.
Our programs did not cause the Arab Spring, for better or worse. The dignity.
If that's what you think, I inferred I did not.
The dignity and respect agenda that was that we saw on display in both Tunisia and Egypt are obviously very powerful for people around the world, but they are fundamentally the responsibility and revolution of Tunisians and Egyptians. And I think a lot of us are very humbled in watching them. But the programs that we conduct and the support we have to Congolese civil society and the population are just as Dan said. I think that the ability to have independent critical media, better election architecture, civil society organizations that are robust and listening and responding to the needs of the population are important. They're part of our values, and they're in response to demand on the ground.
And we have to we have to also be addressing issues, keeping our eye on a month, 6 months, a year down the road, because we don't want to be caught in a position where we're caught off guard again, and the disasters that could happen because we're looking at this particular moment in time instead of not trying to calculate and predict what the future may bring. You agree with me there?
Totally agree. We're not, at least we at USAID are particularly good at predicting the future, but maybe our colleagues at the State Department are better at it. But I will say that we as an administration have been very focused on what is called the Presidential Study Directive 10. In August, the President launched a process where we're looking at atrocity prevention. We're trying to figure out what tools we can bring to bear, where the gaps are, early warning systems, response. Obviously, this is about political leadership. But in the context like the DRC, we're really actively working to try and figure out what are there technological fixes? Should we be using certain kinds of, and we mentioned the cell phones and the cell towers, are there ways in which we can better organize ourselves to be responsive? Do we see patterns of violence?
None of us are going to be able to predict the future with accuracy, but my position has always been before we make a radical change into something, we have to sit down and seriously, you folks have to sit down and seriously ask yourselves and consult with us if you want our input or any assistance. What happens if?
Well, we are also actually in the process of a 5-year strategic planning process. We see this as an enormous opportunity to put everything on the table and say, how do we get to where we want to be? What should we be doing more investments in the democracy sector? Should we be doing less in others? What does the recent past tell us about what we should be doing differently?
Okay. Chairman Payne, please.
Yeah, just on the question of candidate Chesekedi, and maybe I see a number of Congolese here, so there could be some Chesekedi supporters and Mobutu supporters, whatever. However, the future of the Congo is going to be with new, young, emerging leadership. I met with Chesekedi back in the 90s when he was complaining about Mobutu and halfway with him sometimes, not with them. He had a parade back in, 91 or 2 that he was going to be president. I think that he had a lot of ability and talent, but his time, unfortunately, was when Mobutu had control over the country and would not allow free and fair elections. Of course, U.S. policy supporting Mobutu, which was wrong, but it was a Cold War policy. And so whether the election, as we know, was flawed, the future of the Congo is not with Chesekedi. Like I said, his time has come and passed. It must be Chesekedi's brother or something. The question is, there needs to be a development of new leadership. There's many Congolese in the United States who are young. They want to go back. They have talent. They know the resources of the country. They know that it's probably the wealthiest country in the world, but the people suffer from poverty. And so I think that we can spend a lot of time on whether it was fair or free. I think what we need to do is to try to move forward, try to have democratic institutions strengthened so that we can then move forward. I'm not pro-Chesekedi or pro-Mobutu. I'm simply pro-Congo. And the future is not back in the 90s, but it's going to be in the future. And so I just want to say that we can still does not change the fact that the elections were flawed, and I do have to commend the Congolese government for trying to pull it off by itself, which without much resource. I believe that the United States put about, in the 06 elections, Ambassador, what do you think it was, $80 or $90 million? This time we gave them $12 million. but the country pulled off the elections with that. That shows a growth, at least in the fact that they're moving forward to some degree. So I just thought I'd say that. I knew I'd get someone upset, but I think the future is in the hands of the new, younger, visionary Congolese that want to see the country grow with its resources rather than a few people who still want to keep the old system going.
Congresswoman Bass has another question, please.
Yes, I just wanted to follow up, Ambassador, with something you were telling me before about the relationship that we have with some of the neighboring countries, and I wanted to know if you could just be a little more specific. Which countries? What is the relationship? How is it helpful?
I think the relationship between the Congo and the neighboring countries is such that we want to avoid the problems that we had in the past. We had countries going into the Congo to exploit their wealth. And so what we're trying to do is have protection and respect for the sovereignty of states. That's number one. Number two is to improve the relationships between these countries. One of the process or fundamental objectives we participated in the tripartite long ago, but it continues today, is to how do you open and maintain a dialogue between all these countries with each other? Obviously, they all have their own respective strategic interests, but how do you support and coordinate? For instance, Rwanda with the concerns on the FDLR, or Uganda with the problems with the LRA and other issues, with the CAR and the Congo, Brazzaville, Burundi.
Maybe I misunderstood you earlier. I thought you were referring to the U.S. relationships with some of the other African countries in trying to help with the situation.
I think, well, in that context, the United States plays a role because we're kind of like the neutral observer, the neutral arbiter, and we've been able to give information, bring parties together, but more important is to be a neutral person to hear the issues on all sides. And I think that's a very critical and important role that we play.
Okay.
I do have a specific question that Chairman Smith would have asked had he been here, and I'm going to read it. There's been discussion in DRC of the formation of a government of national unity as the best remaining means of resolving what has become a post-election crisis. Similar responses to flawed elections in Zimbabwe and Kenya have not been successful. You have stated that the administration is not promoting a coalition government. What then would be your response to efforts to form a government of national unity in the DRC? Ambassador?
I alluded to it a little bit earlier, but it's not so much a coalition, it's an inclusive government. I think that in itself will help support the aspirations of the people of the Congo and make really what I think you, Congressman, have raised with the idea of the Arab Spring is what President Obama said in Ghana 3 years ago. And the fundamental pillar of our relationship is to ensure that there's democratic values. In other words, governments that are accountable to the people. And through an inclusive government, to have the Congolese government accountable to all factions, whether supporters of Tshisekedi, supporters of Camara, supporters of Kabila. That's really the fundamental issue that we're looking at. And I'm sorry the other person left because everyone, it doesn't matter the ages or whatever, the aspirations, I think, are there to bring about a better tomorrow for the people, as you, Congressman Payne, have always done throughout your time in Africa. And that's what we're trying to achieve here as well.
In getting to closing here, what bang are we getting for our buck here in the United States? And what other countries and to what extent are they contributing to these efforts?
I should really let the bucks talk. But let me just say 20 seconds worth of framing. I think it is important to underscore the importance of the value of our investments in preserving stability in the places where stability is and allowing the incremental progress in law enforcement and justice, and to remove investments would cause backsliding. And so I think it's often difficult to value, and no one wants to overvalue keeping the ball where it is on the field. But losing yardage is really expensive, and we're always trying to push it down the field. So I just want to underscore the importance of the investments that we're making on things like building the judicial sector, helping train them to investigate SGBV, helping them reform the way that they manage prisons, et cetera. All of those things are having an impact, even if the progress is still very incremental.
It's absolutely critical that we not penalize the Congolese people because of the way in which elements of a government did or did not execute this election. So as we think about, compared to other parts of the continent, we've actually invested or investing relatively little. And remarkably, we have, as I think others have alluded to, some small investments have yielded some very interesting results where, for example, working with citizens in local government, having citizens hold accountable local governments to make sure their tax receipts are going to support what the authorities say they're supporting. I totally agree with the idea that going forward, an emphasis on a new cohort and leadership is really critical, and I think that's true across the continent. I think that's true in this country. That is a sort of, those two pillars of leadership and the kind of open government are ways in which we're doing what is usually called good governance work in a kind of 21st century way, layering on the use of technology and making sure citizens have voices. But it's really critical that we not, as of course you asked the question of bang for buck, that we not, the answer comes out that we're going to cut. We need to be thinking about how we support Congolese people going forward.
Please keep a very, very stern eye on our tax dollars as if that money were coming out of your individual pockets. Please. And my last question or looking for a remark from you, what do we do about the Central African Republic coming over into the borders and kidnapping people, and even on the east, other countries coming in? The LRA. Be more specific, thank you. Going into the DRC and actually doing mining.
Yeah, and that's again the hope that our Special Forces unit will bring as far as training and capacity building enhancement. But more important is talking to our ambassador Larry Wallers in the area. He's been able to talk to the presidents and the people and work very closely with them. You know, as far as the number of attacks are way down in the area, the number of groups that are leaving the LRA to go to reconciliation has been up, and so I think that far has been a progress. You want to add?
My only addition would be that it continues to be a driving concern. The help, the assistance we're giving in order to go after the LRA, the assistance in training, is important, and particularly important for the DRC, because even though the attacks are down, as the ambassador said, down to 278 in 2011 from 306 the year before, 80% of those attacks are still happening in the DRC.
Okay. Do any of my other colleagues have a comment or statement, please?
I would just like to, clarify when I was saying that we need to have new, young vision and ideas. I don't necessarily mean young in chronological age. I just mean that there are people who have a vision. What we need is a vision for the leadership of the Congo. I just want to say one final thing, that we're losing a very talented person who's been a very close associate of mine for the entire time that I've been in Congress, Ted Donier. Ted is leaving the CRS to be a special envoy to the UN, to the president of South Sudan. And Ted and I have traveled maybe 36 times to Africa. He knew every leader, he knew every rebel. He knew more rebels than leaders. And he would drag me into the rebel dens, and we would be talking and discussing. We went to Congo when Kabila, we met with Kabila while Mobutu was still the president. Of course, the State Department didn't like that. You remember, Ambassador? Remembers? Yeah. We've gone to the battlefields in South Sudan when Dr. Garang was leading his forces. We've been in Burundi meeting with the Hutus and the villages. In Rwanda, he's done more to stabilize Rwanda. South Sudan, I know of no other person who has dedicated himself and has really made a big difference to the lives of millions of people in Africa. And so we will certainly miss him. I miss my traveling partner. But I did want to say that he was a tremendous asset to our country. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. I want to thank Chairman Payne and Congresswoman Bass for sticking this out with me. I want to thank our distinguished panel. It was very informative. Please see that you do get the documents and information to my colleagues for which they asked. I appreciate that very much. And I thank the people sitting in here listening to this hearing. It's again, after my trip, it's extraordinarily important that we know all these issues and make solid, concrete decisions. Thank you very much, and the hearing is adjourned.
Smith better watch out for you.